be handing, or Jennifer will be handing out comment cards. Please fill them out. Include a comment. We are going to be doing drawings for free t-shirts at the end of the day for your participation, so thank you for that. Portrait Platoon is going on out in the periphery of the Commons area. If you have an opportunity to get your portrait done, please do sit up there. They usually average about a half hour if you're willing to do a sitting for that long. Thanks for coming in for today. I know it's a small group, but that was to be expected. We've got Mr. Brad Westfall here. Brad is actually, was just a Senior PHP Web Developer within Vianet Management, but he is the founder and president of azpixels.com. He's been really in industry for about 13 years. He's worked with over 200 clients, including such notables as ASU, AlphaGraphics, and of course Vianet Management. His technical knowledge really includes things such as PHP, MySQL, browser-compatible HTML and CSS, user interface, user experience, and JavaScript. Today, though, Brad's going to be talking about jQuery. jQuery is really kind of taking over the web in many ways. He's going to talk about kind of how it can be an alternative to Flash and to DHTML. It's really kind of turned into and emerged as a standard with animators and web developers. And he's really kind of going to be showing you a few takeaways as well. So without further ado, I bring you Brad Westfall. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Well, thank you very much. Yeah, I started azpixels when I was about 20 years old or so at ASU, and the idea was I liked the name azpixels because AZ was generic enough where I could have moved somewhere else and it would still apply, because it could have meant, like, you know, A to Z. We kind of do it all on the web. So I was kind of thinking ahead, and I was, you know, dabbling in web design and really liked it, and went through the CIS program at ASU, and that kind of gave me a more well-rounded academic knowledge of, you know, object-oriented programming, and took some Java classes and some C# classes and stuff. And then decided I liked the web stuff a little bit more than I liked the other traditional stuff, and so I kept doing it. And I continued to do azpixels, eventually went on to work for Vianet Management, which is the owner of roommates.com and puppyfind.com, which are two of the biggest websites in those namespaces. And they do some good stuff up there, but recently I decided to kind of go back and do my own thing. So that's a really recent change. I think all the printed material with you guys still says I work at Vianet Management, but that's because I just kind of quit last week. So anyway, I wanted to kind of give you at least my take on the history of the web, and maybe I can introduce you guys to some stuff that maybe you didn't know, or maybe you know a lot of this stuff already. But you know, HTML and CSS is obviously where the web came from, you know, static websites, and you know, there was this concept of table-based designs. For me, it was front page. Everyone was using like Dreamweaver or front page to make, you know, websites, and you know, none of us really knew what we were doing, and it was the easiest thing to do was to just drag tables on the screen and then nest tables inside of those, and nest tables inside of those, and use tables to you know, merge cells, split cells. Remember all that stuff? Right click, split cells. You know, make your websites. It was really sloppy. It led to really bad design implementation. And but that's where it got started. CSS was actually kind of more of a latecomer, a little bit more mid to late 90s, and at the time, browser compatibility was a huge issue. It still kind of is, but browser compatibility, you know, doing stuff for, you know, at the time it was Internet Explorer, and then later on, you know, Firefox. But that's really been our biggest burden on the internet, is developing something that works on all the different devices, and Microsoft has really made that almost purposefully difficult on us. Not purposely, but, you know, they tried making their own standards, and no one else wanted to follow them. The W3C is supposed to make the standards, and Microsoft tried ruling the world, but they didn't win. At one point, they had their VB script, which was kind of an alternative to JavaScript. It's kind of like a Visual Basic type of syntax. Yeah, I guess it's still around. Someone just told me the other day it's still around. I didn't even know that. I thought it died with the dinosaurs, but VB script is still around. I guess Microsoft is just recently starting to adopt a lot more JavaScript. DHTML, we're going to get a lot into that, because that is really what jQuery is. It's not really an alternative to DHTML. It's more of a better way of doing it. My first experience doing DHTML was very bad and you know, very difficult. But what it is it's basically manipulating all the HTML and CSS using code instead of just serving up a static HTML and CSS document and letting the browser render it and then click, serve up another document, render it, click, going from page to page. What if you want to have some functionality built into clicks, have a click, do something with the HTML that we're already looking at instead of go and regenerate a whole bunch of brand new HTML. And it was very difficult because JavaScript is also doesn't have a lot of browser compatibility with trying to do different things, and it was kind of slow. And there's not a lot of well, JavaScript's not slow, but doing the development is very slow because it was so cumbersome and really difficult. So this is basically the 90s. Macromedia developed Flash. Flash was really amazing. I used to love Flash. I mean, everyone loved Flash when it first came out. I was kind of known as kind of the Flash guy in my circles at ASU in development. But Flash kind of came along and solved a lot of the problems that HTML was having. HTML and CSS. There wasn't any compatibility issues. It's its own little sandbox that sits in the browser. It's its own world. It's not really all that much different than including a JPEG or including, if it was possible to make a Photoshop file and just include it into the website and have the website render it and have like a programming language within Photoshop, that's essentially what Flash is. It's just a vector-based, graphics program that has ActionScript, which is based off of JavaScript, there to manipulate it. So, and then the browser compatibility issues are always there. Okay. So then, the Web 2.0 gibberish, and I call it that because no one can really define it. I'd really be interested in hearing someone's definition of it. But some people define it as the new ways of using CSS, kind of getting away from the table-based stuff, getting into more div tag CSS-based things. Some people define it as just the graphic design look, like that has a Web 2.0 look to it. Some people define it as web services. In other words, instead of isolated websites, just owning all of their own information, websites are starting to talk to each other through different APIs and different services. And so there was a lot of different ways of describing it. But even though I don't like the word Web 2.0, there certainly was a change in the early 2000s with how the internet was starting to behave. And so I guess that's what it's called. JavaScript, wins. VBScript isn't really a big player anymore. At that time, JavaScript was by far the biggest one, as opposed to VBScript. And some other things, Flash, becomes wildly popular. The early 2000s was when I started using it. Div-based CSS designs. I've never really liked that term. That's kind of the alternative term to the table-based designs, but I don't really like it because you could do CSS and div tags inside of tables, and people were doing it. But for some reason, the alternative of table-based design got coined either div tag-based design or CSS-based design, and it was more of a proper use. And the browser compatibility issues continue, and then at some point around 2005, 2006, Prototype and jQuery come out. They are essentially, they're not alternatives to JavaScript, they're additions to JavaScript. They enhance JavaScript. They're libraries of functionality. So it's important to think of jQuery as not something that replaces JavaScript, but something that enhances it, because JavaScript is actually extremely powerful. And it's amazing how the language, JavaScript, hasn't really changed too much in the last 15 years, and it's still as powerful as it is because so many other programming languages have changed so much. HTML5, CSS3, hopefully you can kind of get an idea of where I'm going. I'm kind of highlighting the important things here. Between HTML5 and CSS3, and jQuery, those were the three things that really kind of kick-started where we have today, which is a much different web than even the Web 2.0 stuff. You can attribute features that Facebook has. When you go to Facebook and you're loading page to page to page, you notice how the URL generally doesn't change very much. All those are AJAX calls. All the stuff that they're doing is dynamic. It's dynamic HTML, it's DHTML, but it's not done in the old traditional way. It's done with things like jQuery or proprietary tools. I'm sure Facebook particularly has a lot of proprietary tools. But there's also been a big emphasis on standards and semantics. Is that something that you guys go over a lot of, is semantics in the coursework? a little bit. The big push for semantics is the browser's ability to describe to the search engines and the crawlers or the devices what regions you're looking at. If you're looking at the header or if you're looking at the footer, it's important for the browser to know where the important content is, and that's semantics. It's the tags' ability to natively tell the devices and the browsers what they are, instead of just having everything be div tags with classes on them saying this is a div tag, class name of header, this is a div tag, class name of footer. Now you actually have a footer tag and you have a head tag and a header tag. And that's semantics. So that's becoming wildly more popular as we move on. Flash starts to decline in the presence of being able to do things that we couldn't do before. You see, Flash's biggest accomplishments were doing graphics and animation. For any of you who have done HTML in the past, where how would we do rounded corners back in 2004, Mike? Images. What about shadows and gradients? Images. And all these things you wanted to do with web design, you have to include as separate files, which means more bandwidth. And then what if you wanted, the shadow, radiance to change or the gradient to change on the fly? I mean, that kind of stuff just was way too intense for the browser to handle with graphics. But if you did it all in Flash, it worked. But now that you have faster JavaScript engines inside of the different browsers, and you have better capabilities with CSS3. Flash isn't as needed anymore. Plus, and this might just be my personal opinion, but Flash is hard to develop in. It's hard to get it to work with the other stuff. If you just want to have a portfolio and all the stuff that makes your website, your Flash portfolio, gets introduced at the beginning, then that's usually a lot easier. Again, it's been a couple of years since I've done anything in Flash, but if you want to have something that's more like a Facebook type of application, you're just not going to make it in Flash. And I do want to emphasize that this talk is not about getting rid of Flash completely. It's about acknowledging that they have different roles, and I still think that Flash is great for certain things. People still use it a lot for video. It gets used a lot for games, anything that has high degree of animation. But its role is becoming a lot more limited. If you just want a flashy menu, then you don't need Flash to make your flashy menu anymore. You can use jQuery. So anyways, what is it? This is a little bit of made up syntax up here, but it kind of looks like jQuery. It's a library, like I already explained. It's supposed to make things extremely easy to use, and it takes, one thing that jQuery takes care of is it takes care of the cross-browser compatibility issues. Before, when you're doing DHTML and just regular native JavaScript, when I say native JavaScript, that just means just JavaScript all by itself. When you're doing native JavaScript, you had to know what browser you were in and change the functionality depending on what browser you were in, and make all these exceptions with different libraries, and namely jQuery. You can just say append this or get me that, and it takes care of all that kind of stuff for you. So let's see what else we got here. So yeah, okay, let's go on. Okay, so if some of you aren't as familiar with the different roles, this is my take on the difference between Flash and its different parts versus, I guess, more traditional web design. Not to say that Flash isn't web design, but in a way it kind of isn't, because it is its own isolated sandbox. But in Flash you have the movies, and you have the stage, which is kind of the same thing as saying in web design you have HTML and CSS. And with the new CSS5 or CSS3, I meant HTML5. You have the canvas tag, and that allows you to do vector-based graphics natively within HTML. And so we're going to talk about the canvas tag as well. It's one of the most exciting tags that we have coming out in the new HTML. And actually, I brought a magazine with me because I just got this last night, and it's kind of funny because it says it's Web Designer Magazine, and it says canvas tag, create animations, games, videos, fonts, and applications without Flash. So there you go. It's pretty much a reiteration of what I'm talking about. And then, of course, you have ActionScript is kind of the equivalent of JavaScript. And you combine the graphics and you combine the code and you get animations. OK, so let's go ahead and look at some examples. I know most of you probably know about ToAdvanced. I picked it because it's the most classic example of really good Flash design. They're probably one of the, back in the early 2000s, they were the heroes of Flash. I don't really know who the heroes of Flash are anymore, but I don't know, maybe you know some different ones. But let me get on here, and this is actually going to be difficult because I can't see the screen, but I can get down here to my browser. And let's see. OK, so this is all being drawn on canvas using JavaScript and, I guess more importantly, jQuery. And you can see that it's pretty responsive. Not a whole lot of glitches or breaking. So I just want to kind of show you guys, give you guys a gist of where where the canvas tag is coming into play, and also JavaScript. So I picked out a few cool things. So we got that, and this one was kind of cool. It kind of collapses and melts when your mouse gets next to the pieces, and then it all kind of comes back together. I know there's very similar things, demonstrations, mathematical demonstrations and whatnot for Flash, but I guess the point that I'm trying to show here is that it's doable without Flash as well. This guy's website I found one time, and I kind of use it. I kind of saved it in my inspirational folder because I thought it was really cool. But if you click, let's see, right here, I guess, no, right here. He's got basically a 3-page website. You were on the home page a second ago, and this is, what does that say? I can't see it. Portfolio. OK, so he's got his portfolio right here. I think he's a graphic designer, web designer, so you can pull this down. This is all being done with Canvas and HTML and JavaScript and CSS. And then I can barely see over there. Is there anything over there for you guys? Let me look at it. I can see it on my screen. So you go over here, and he's got a contact page. This is actually kind of trendy. What I've been seeing a lot of these days is a lot of graphic designers and web designers are doing their whole website on one page with kind of a scrolling effect. Usually they aren't horizontal scrolling. Usually they're vertical scrolling, but they might start you off in the middle of the scroll where you're looking at kind of like the ground level, and then if you scroll down, it's kind of like you're underground, and they're showing you, what kind of behind the scenes. And if you scroll up into the clouds, they'll show you some contacts and some portfolio stuff. But yeah, this is all being done with jQuery. And let's see. This one is in a language other than English, and so it's hard for me to know what I'm clicking on. But I thought I'd show you this one real quick. I would imagine this is portfolio. So pretty cool. To the naked eye, 5 years ago, if someone looked at this, you would say it has to be Flash. It just has to be. It's impossible for something like that to not be Flash. But it's not anymore. This is a pretty cool website. Not a whole lot of animations going on, but still very modern. We'll see how fast it loads. What's that?
Our school's computers.
Yeah. So let's see, click on landscapes. I guess I can't drag that. It looks like I can. Some of HTML, depending on HTML and JavaScript, depending on what you're doing, still needs kind of the preloaders. That's something that's kind of annoying to a lot of people when they go to Flash sites. They don't like the preloaders, and for the most part, you can actually get rid of that by taking on more of a HTML and JavaScript approach. But in some cases, if you're going to load, especially a bunch of images ahead of time, that's probably what they're waiting for is the pictures. But there are a lot more advantages, and I kind of wanted to get into an open discussion, if we can, maybe in a little bit about what your guys' thoughts are, and as soon as I get done showing some of these things. This one is real simple. The birds fly faster, or they fly backwards, and this is actually a little framework for people to use to kind of help them build animated HTML and JavaScript websites. This is an example of one of those vertical websites I was talking about. Instead of scrolling, I'll actually click on their thing here. Click on this. Okay, so pretty cool. All being done with the same old stuff. We've all seen these kind of transitions done about 10,000 times in Flash. Anytime you look at WordPress websites, they usually have headers like this with image type of transitional stuff. And I honestly can't speak to the complexity of how it's easier, faster, or whatever in Flash versus doing it in JavaScript. But that's kind of what plugins are for. You can find a big wealth of open source plugins and all kinds of cool little photo transitional stuff. Okay, this right here. Okay, and then we have this graph. This is actually Google Insights, and what it does is it allows you to search for some keywords, and Google will try to give you an idea of how popular these search terms are relevant to other ones. And so picking a few alternative languages like alternative JavaScript libraries like Dojo and MooTools. Let me scroll up so you can see those. Let's see, jQuery prototype, Dojo, MooTools. You can see that the jQuery, which is the blue one, it kind of killed the momentum of MooTools, which is the green one, and it's definitely getting wildly popular. Just for fun, last night I changed out one of these search terms for Flash. Let me show you what happens. Okay. So Flash now is this guy up here. Remember when I said back in like 04, 05, 06, that was when it was really popular. So you can make the argument that Flash in its heyday was exceedingly more popular than jQuery is now. But look where jQuery and Flash are kind of coming to an intersection, and I'm sure they're not going to bounce off of each other. I'm sure it's going to continue to go in that direction. Some of the recent bad news for Flash is that unfortunately, because of Steve Jobs' attitude towards adopting Flash, all the Apple devices don't really work well and play well with Flash. Not because they can't, just because they don't want to, and so that kind of led to other browsers, or rather other devices, the Android devices and such, also not working very well with it. And so it was a big pain apparently for Flash to keep or Adobe to keep building Flash for mobile devices. So as recently as November in 2011, they decided to stop supporting Flash. So you're not going to see any more Flash on mobile, at least. For the regular web you will, but not on mobile. So that was kind of a big hit to Flash right there. Let me go back to the PowerPoint. Okay, so why JavaScript now? It's been around forever. How come it's now just making all this momentum? Well, you can make the argument that the browser compatibility was really holding it back, and so the idea of making a JavaScript library that kind of solves the browser compatibility issues was a big player in that. But plus, it's the browsers themselves. It's the fact that they're a lot faster. Chrome was a huge player in kind of rewriting a JavaScript engine and making JavaScript a lot faster, which inherently makes things like jQuery a lot faster. Another thing is here's some of the old problems. Obviously we talked about DHTML and native JavaScript and how it was very difficult. CSS, we kind of talked about this already. It was really lacking some of the really common things like rounded corners, gradients, shadows, custom fonts. That's something that you've been able to do in Flash for a long time. I've seen some really creative things. You want to talk about kind of a little side topic, SEO. People would take H1 tags and they would put like span tags inside of them, make the span tags invisible, but the span tag has the rich content for the Google to read, and then they would replace the background image of the H1 tag so it was a picture of the more stylized font, because in the web world we only have as many fonts as we can predictably get from the person's computer, which basically just means Arial and Tahoma and Verdana and a few other really boring fonts. So if you want something that's more stylized, you had to make a graphic out of it. Well, I've seen people go to the extent of writing JavaScript libraries where they would take that H1 tag with your heading information inside of it, and they would read the text, have Flash get introduced and replace the H1 tag, have Flash have the font file that you want built into it, and then write out in Flash what you want said, so that way you can get that fancy text. There's been some wildly creative things done to get custom fonts embedded into websites, and Flash was when I saw that, I thought, oh, game over. We're going to make cool websites now. We can do our own fonts, and doing it with images before was terrible because it wasn't dynamic. I don't really make websites so that I have 5 pages and here's page 1 with its title and here's page 2 with its title. A lot of the websites I make are extremely dynamic, where all the titles are dynamically driven from databases, and so I can't do things with graphics with PNG files or whatever. So so that Flash technique was really cool at the time, but now with CSS3 you can include a true type font into the browser from the server. The user doesn't have to have it on their computer. And you can address it in your CSS just as if the person did have it in their computer. So so that's really cool. And you can probably notice that if you go to a lot of really modern CSS websites, notice their really cool fonts that they have. Try highlighting the text. If you can highlight it, it's a font. It's not a graphic, obviously. So okay, so this is kind of my take on kind of the old web and how important each role was. JavaScript. JavaScript interacted with HTML. People would use it for form validation and boring things like that, and CSS decorated your HTML, but JavaScript didn't really interact with CSS a whole lot. But that little sliver right there in the middle was DHTML, and it wasn't as relevant. But if you were to look at people's resumes and what jobs were looking for back in 2004, 2005, you had to have DHTML. You had to be a DHTML person. You had to be a DHTML expert. Now, you have to have jQuery in your resume. You just have to. You have to know it. And HTML hasn't gotten any more important than it was before. It was always really important. But CSS and JavaScript have become wildly more important. And the area that we have to play with that we call DHTML, because of that, is a lot better and bigger. Okay, so here's some of the things that changed, which we've kind of already gone over. I want to show you guys the CSS3 generator. What's my time?
About 20 minutes.
Okay, great. Okay, so this is one of my favorite websites, and there's a handful of them like it, but CSS3 Generator. The CSS syntax for choosing rounded corners and shadows and gradients and all those great things I was talking about is it's not perfectly easy yet. First of all, just so you guys know, to kind of go back to HTML and CSS, it's what's called a living standard. In other words, there's not going to be like a version 5. There's not going to be an HTML6, or at least there's not supposed to be. There's not going to be an HTML7. There's not supposed to be a CSS4. It's going to be a living standard. They're going to make the standards, each one at a time, and then the browsers are going to adopt them whenever they can adopt them. And actually, the original finish date for HTML5 is supposed to be in 2024. So about a decade, more than a decade away. But all the browsers have been kind of in a war in the last couple of years, like they always have. And they're all trying to be better than each other, and so they're all trying to adopt these CSS3 and HTML standards, and so they're all rapidly employing them. That's why Firefox has gone from version 3 about a year ago to version, I think they're like 10 or 9 or something like that. 11. Okay. I use Linux, and so it doesn't update as good with that. But anyways, it's going to be a living standard, and so if you want to use a particular box shadow or radius, you just have to accept the fact that certain browsers might support it a little bit differently than other ones, and certain ones might not support it at all. So there's websites that will detail for you, at what level they're supporting each one, but they don't support them the exact same. So let me show you what they have to do. it's probably better to just show than try to explain. Okay, so I made, I'll make it bigger. I put 5 pixels and make something a little bit bigger. 50. Okay, and you probably saw that little transition. That was jQuery. Okay, so this at the bottom, browser radius 50 pixels. That's all you have to do now to make stuff so that it has rounded corners. A little bit different than what we had to do. Actually, with the way we used to have to do rounded corners, you'd have a div tag or whatever box you had, and you would have to put other boxes inside of it because each box can only have one background image, and so each one would have a quarter of the pie, and you'd put one in each spot, and each one would host a different quarter of the circle, and that's how you would do it. That's one way to do it. And now one of the things you can do with CSS3 is a div tag can have multiple backgrounds at the same time. So it's kind of funny because if you hear that, you're like, oh, we can do rounded corners finally without having to do it the old way. Well, you can also just do an easier version of rounded corners, which is this. So up here you see WebKit and Mozilla. You have to kind of do it their special way because they aren't really fully supported yet. And doing those little hyphen WebKit or hyphen Moz in front of it kind of helps it go along. So I don't want to have to remember all this all day long, and so I go to these CSS generators, and we can further go to, let's say, box shadow, and let's see. Okay, and put a box shadow on it. So yeah, I mean these CSS3 generators are pretty cool. You just kind of copy and paste and put in your CSS. Maybe if we have time, I'll talk about less CSS, which I was able to talk to Allison about, or talk to me about it, because it's going to drastically, less CSS and similar type tools are going to change CSS in the way that jQuery changed JavaScript. It's that big, okay? So hopefully we can talk about that. Okay, so going right through real quick here. What matters? The race to the top. With technology, in my opinion, these 3 things matter: adoption, compatibility, and sustainability. Okay, the reason why Java, not JavaScript, is so wildly popular is because they made it so that it is so compatible with everything. Okay, and it was also widely adopted. Sustainability, unlike Flash, jQuery is JavaScript, and even though jQuery is maintained by a particular group, JavaScript is not, and so if jQuery falls under, you could always just start using the next one, and trust me, there's a million in line trying to be the next big thing. But it's going to be sustainable. JavaScript has been around forever. jQuery is not a trend. JavaScript is certainly not a trend. So if you want to make the switch, it's going to be very safe, and that's pretty much it. So what do you guys think? Yeah?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah?
I mean, I've been doing HTML for like 2 weeks, and that was a lot to take in.
Sure. Okay, well, is that a question?
Well, I don't know. I mean, where should I start? Like, should I just not even do HTML? Should I just go straight to jQuery?
Okay, well, see, that's kind of maybe the misconception is you have to have HTML. Okay. HTML is the building blocks of every single website, so you have to learn HTML. I would say don't focus on HTML5 learning so much until you have a good understanding of HTML4. When you make a website today and you say this website is HTML5, that's kind of a misnomer because 90% of the website is still HTML4. You just might be employing the canvas tag as one of your 200 tags you have for this particular page or something, and so you might say that it's, a 0.5% of your website is HTML5, or if you're using 2 or 3 tags of HTML5. So you got to realize your website is going to be a mix of mostly HTML4 and HTML5. CSS is the decorator that kind of comes along. I always kind of describe it like a house. Like HTML is your bricks and your plywood and everything else, your cinder blocks. But if you took 2 identical raw houses just made out of those raw materials, you could probably turn one into a Southwestern style house with certain types of tile and certain types of stucco and everything else, and then with another one you could turn it into a Midwestern house with boards and wood and whatever else they do in the Midwest. I don't So CSS is like your decorator, okay? But with just HTML and CSS, you just have a static website. JavaScript is what makes it move, okay? So when you're on Facebook and you click on someone else's comment, and it dynamically makes more space for you to leave a comment. And when it says leave a comment here in gray text, and you click there, and that goes away. And then you type your comment and you hit submit. It's JavaScript that's validating that you typed something, and then it goes to the server, saves it, responds back, says, hey, this was saved. That back and forth is called AJAX, which is not a technology all into itself. It's the culmination of JavaScript being able to talk to the server without doing a page refresh. Does that make sense? Yeah. And then when you get that success response back, it then changes the HTML to look like you left a comment. None of it required a page refresh. So JavaScript is a role player, but it's definitely not the whole thing. Okay, did you have a question?
Right, slightly off topic, what is less CSS?
Okay, awesome. Does anyone want to have any questions about what I talked about before I go into less CSS for a few minutes?
I got a quick thing.
Okay.
Just when it comes to compatibility for different types of browsers, I know obviously you work on some high traffic sites. So on those more high traffic sites, do you guys implement any CSS3 or HTML5?
You implement CSS3 when you need CSS3. I certainly do a lot more CSS3 than I do HTML5 because rounding corners. I guess that kind of gets into the graceful degradation versus progressive enhancement conversation. Yeah. So if you're not familiar with those terms, look it up. That's a whole nother meeting. But it's the idea that, okay, remember back in the day when you would you'd have your style sheets and you wanted to do some cool stuff, but it wasn't supported on Internet Explorer. And so you'd have a backup CSS file for Internet Explorer, and you'd tell the browser, well, if you're Internet Explorer, then use this backup style sheet to kind of override things. Well, now there's been more of a movement towards an attitude of just make this with the rounded corners, and if the browser, if they're using IE6 or 7, by the way, IE6 is down to like 1% or something in the United States, but IE7 is a problem. IE7 is the new IE6. The cancer kind of spread a little bit further. So if they're using IE7, then rounded corners still doesn't work, so the person doesn't see rounded corners. Their experience isn't as sweet because they're using an older browser. So make your website so that it works on all browsers, but if the experience is maybe a little downgraded because you're using old browsers, it's not generally considered a big deal. So I use lots of CSS3 with that kind of mindset. HTML5, I'll be completely honest, I haven't had a need to use canvas tag yet on my own. Actually, I did some charts where I have some data. There's a really cool API where you could take a traditional table of data, columns and rows, and you can tell this JavaScript library, hey, turn this into a pie graph. In the same way that you can highlight stuff in Excel that's in columns and rows, and you can say make a pie graph out of this, where the x-axis is one thing and the y-axis is another thing, and so there's a lot of tools out there that will turn raw data like that's in the HTML into a graph. Now think about it. What does the browser or what does the search engine see when they look at that raw source? They see the data, okay? But the user sees what? A graph. That's supposed to be the beauty of the internet or the newer internet is being able to show the search engines what they should be seeing so they can hold on to it, and then enriching the experience with JavaScript and CSS. And that is not changing things so you're showing Google one thing and showing the user another thing. That is not the same thing. So to go into less CSS or similar products, I can't remember any of the other competitor products, but less CSS is the easiest buzzword to remember. So you're probably familiar with CSS a little bit. It can be a little repetitive. What if you have a design with 4 colors in it, 4 or 5 colors? And I'm not saying that the colors are being used equally. I'm actually a graphic designer. I would make a design with maybe 2 or 3 colors, and then maybe you might use like a certain shade of dark gray for your text or something, and maybe a soft gray for your backgrounds. But let's say you have 5 colors repeated over and over and over again. Some of my style sheets are over 1,000 lines big, and if you have to go and change a certain color over and over and over again, that could be a little bit of a pain. CSS is not a programming language, it's a configuration language, essentially. So what if you have a variable at the top of the screen, and you do it with like an @ sign, and then you say the variable, this, my dark color. You wouldn't say my red equals this, because that kind of defeats the whole purpose, because if you say my red equals this, and then what if you want to do something completely different, it's not red, then all your variables are horribly named. What you might say is my primary color is this, my secondary color is that. Define your colors, and then you can use them down below, right? Thinking back to that CSS3 generator I just did, I've used rounded corners of 5 pixels so many times. That's just everyone has a number, but my numbers, I like doing 5. I guess I just like doing 5 pixels. So with less CSS, you can make a kind of a function, if you will. And then in your, let's say your H1 tag, so you say H1, open curly, you can say, get this, you basically call your function, give me rounded corners or whatever you want to name it, and pass in the number 5, so you can pass in parameters, and it will deliver the appropriate CSS for that. So you can essentially make functions and variables. It allows you to do a lot of really cool stuff. That's why it's called less CSS. And it's definitely very cool. And when you do it, there's a compiler. I don't know about Windows, but there's a compiler in Linux, and so you write it in the less syntax. And if you want to do some less syntax and you want to do some traditional CSS, it will all play together really nicely. And then you can just compile it whenever you want. So because obviously browsers don't understand what less syntax is. They don't understand CSS is not supposed to have functions, and it's not supposed to have variables. So it eventually compiles all this stuff into just regular native CSS and pushes it onto your production site. So.
Is this open source stuff?
Oh yeah, definitely. It's all open source. Okay. I would never even mention anything to you guys if it wasn't open source.
Yes, I can find that.
Yeah, it's very cool. And anytime I want to learn more about a product like this, I would always just search for less CSS versus and see what Google tells you, and they'll tell you all the competitors. Right. So what else you guys got? Anything?
Well, I mean,
Sure.
I was going to ask, going back to this idea of the canvas, I'm having a hard time understanding if you're trying to create an animation, how can you preview it as you're putting it together? You're mirroring the jQuery to what, text and images?
Well, okay. When I was doing Flash, ActionScript was not as big of a role player when I was doing Flash, and we would draw directly to the stage. I'm gonna draw this thing. I'm gonna right-click, make it a movie, and then you kind of program the ActionScript kind of after the fact. And then I employed someone, Scott, if you remember, Scott Gaines, and he made all of his stuff programmatically. He would never go to the stage and draw anything. He made all of his stuff programmatically, and that was his take on the right way to do Flash. And that's about when I abandoned using Flash and kind of started getting into some other stuff. But I don't really know exactly the answer to how you would preview something. Yeah, so sorry.
Probably just have to open it in a browser, see what it did, and then go back and try to make adjustments.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of it's based off of the a map, and the upper left is 0, 0. And just like Flash,
yeah, that's right,
and so it's a canvas tag, and so unlike trying to position a div tag within a div tag and dealing with like float left, float right, or doing position absolute and trying to deal with that, it is a stage very much like the Flash stage, and it has coordinates, and you can say draw a rectangle at this coordinate, make it this big, make it this gradient, and it's all very basic. I mean, you'll find so many examples if you just try to find canvas tag with HTML if you want to keep it.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a lot of oh, this game was created in HTML5, but you can't really see the source code, so
Well, I'm sure you could. Yeah, I mean, if the JavaScript is driving it, then you could. But a lot of people do minifiers on their JavaScript. In other words, or their CSS. If you don't know what a minifier is, you have all this white space in with doing your tabs and doing your hard returns with CSS and JavaScript. And that white space accounts for some of the download time. And so you can throw it through a minifier, and also the name of your variables. You might name things with like 10 characters or 5 characters, the length of the name of your variables. These minifiers will name your variables things like X and Y. And so you minify it, it shrinks down your CSS or your JavaScript a lot. And in the same way like a zip, would shrink down to something, and then it serves that up. And so if you're worried about, that's one thing that I guess Flash kind of has over some of these other stuff is you can't see someone's Flash stuff unless you run it through one of those decompilers, I guess, and try to figure it out. But you can look at any of these websites I showed you and right-click and look at what they're doing and see their HTML and CSS, but it might be minified. And they might be doing that for protection reasons and also for speed reasons. And by the way, jQuery, when you get it, they'll give you the minified version of it. If you want to get the unminified version and look through it, go ahead. I know. I had a guy that worked for me that did that. He's like, yeah, I'm about halfway studying jQuery. I was like, what do you mean? He's like, I'm like looking at it line by line. I want to learn how it works. Well, that's awesome. I wouldn't do that because I don't have time, although I think it would be fun if I had a lot more time. But they give you the minified version. And another thing they do is they host, Google hosts a lot of projects like this. So instead of this jQuery file being on my server, and when you first visit my website, it's one of the many things I got to give you for the first time before it gets cached, I can have my link that points to jQuery go to the one that Google has. And I can even direct it to which version I want. And I can say, I'm using jQuery 1.7 or 1.2 or something like that. And think about it, if someone else on the internet or this visitor of yours has already visited a website that has jQuery, which is likely, and if that website was hosting it on Google, which is likely, then they come to your site and it's already cached because the browser just sees that the location is the same thing. It doesn't have to go out and re-get it. So, yeah. Cool. Anything else? I think that's about our time.
We got time?
Yeah.
Sorry.
But you'll be around afterwards though, right?
Oh yeah, I'm gonna hang out for a little bit if you guys want to keep talking.
All right.
Thanks a lot.
Great. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Brad.
Yeah.
And next up we'll have Dr. Matt